Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowsky and we are joined today by Maureen Watt. Lovely to have you, Maureen.
Hi, Patrick. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. For our first story, we've got the Ukraine update, day 1090 of a conflict. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has appeared to rebuff Donald Trump's first attempt at cornering Ukraine's critical mineral deposits to pay back the US billions spent fighting Russia. The Ukrainian president said that a draft deal presented in Kiev last week by the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent did not yet contain the security provisions Kiev needed. In a meet with press interviews, in a Meet the Press interview, Zelensky explained his terms, saying, "Help us defend this, and we will make money on this together." And here it's very important that in this document shall be a term to protect it, and that is the security guarantees. If we are not given the security guarantees from the United States, I believe that the economic treaty will not work. It must all be fair. The minerals in Ukraine include so-called rare earth varieties, as well as titanium, uranium, lithium, and others. Free sources told Reuters news agency that the US had proposed taking ownership of 50% of Ukraine's critical minerals. Zelensky also pointed out that there are deposits in areas belonging to Ukraine but captured by Russia. Today, US officials led by Marco Rubio are due to start preliminary talks in Saudi Arabia with Russian counterparts over a ceasefire. Partly in answer to that, Emmanuel Macron will host a Paris summit of European defense powers to address the US lockout of Europe and Kiev from the process. This week, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Rubio uh, the US Secretary of State, are due to hold the first meeting at their level between the US and Russia in over 2 years. The French president's Paris meeting will aim to outline a European action plan after days of chaotic briefing by the Trump administration, writes Patrick Winter, John Henley, Julian Borger, and Peter Walker. President Zelensky has also headed to the Middle East. On Sunday, he arrived in the United Arab Emirates to discuss Russia-Ukraine prisoner exchanges. A Ukrainian delegation arrived in Saudi Arabia reportedly to prepare for a possible visit by Zelensky. However, there was no confirmation that he would attend the US-Russia talk in Riyadh, with the Saudi Arabia visit said to be about other matters such as investment. On Sunday, Rubio tried to ease US-Europe tensions, telling CBS the continent would be part of a real negotiations to end Moscow's war and signaling the US talks with Russia were a chance to see how serious Vladimir Putin really was about peace. The frenzied political developments came as Ukrainian forces recaptured the village of Piskan, southwest of the city of Pokrovsk, in the front line of the country's east, amid signs Russia's advance may be slowing down. Russian units had made rapid gains in the area in December and January, but since early this month, their progress has stalled. Ukraine's air defense units were trying to repel an overnight Russian drone attack in Kiev, officials said early on Monday. "Please stay safe," said the military administration chief Timur Tkachenko. Two drones violated Moldovan airspace late on Sunday near the border with Ukraine, the government said, 3 days after the Russian ambassador was summoned to the foreign ministry in connection with an earlier incident. Russia's defense ministry said on Monday that air defenses destroyed 90 Ukrainian drones overnight. It claimed 38 drones were downed over the Sea of Azov along with a guided missile, 24 drones over the southern Russian region of Krasnodar, and the rest over other regions, as well as over the Crimean Peninsula, which is Ukrainian territory illegally occupied by Russia. The Russian claims could not be verified. Maureen, I'll let you comment on some of the elements in the story, keeping in mind that later we will be deep diving into the European summit taking place. What do you make of the rest of the story?
Yeah, well, I think clearly it is important for Ukraine not to cede any territory and to be seen to be continuing to push to defend what they have and to be pushing forward because I think the lines are going to be really important if and when negotiations come. I mean, it must be hellish for Ukrainians at the moment to think that behind their backs, other countries could do a peace deal over what is going to be their territory. And, you know, one can see that Ukrainians will want to make gains where they can. As you said, we're going to speak more about the meetings of Russia and the US a bit later, but yeah, I think it really is important that for Ukraine's sake that they keep pushing the Russians back and, you know, go further into Kursk in order to be in a good bargaining position when and if they are allowed into talks.
Thank you, Maureen. For our Middle East update, at least 48,271 Palestinians have been killed and 111,693 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October in 2025, according to the Gaza Health Authority. Israel has poised to again miss a deadline for withdrawing its troops from southern Lebanon after the military said it would remain in 5 strategic points in the country. Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem said yesterday that any Israeli military presence on Lebanese soil after 18th of February would be considered an occupying force, saying, "Everyone knows how an occupation is dealt with." The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has arrived in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a day after meeting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Rubio was received by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. On the agenda is likely to be Donald Trump's plans to move millions of Palestinians out of their territories in Gaza and the occupied West Bank to neighboring countries such as Egypt and Jordan, a proposal opposed by MBS and widely condemned as an endorsement of ethnic cleansing. An alternative to Trump's plan to, quote, take over the Gaza Strip is being prepared by Egypt in conjunction with the World Bank. The process would be handed over on an interim basis to the control of a social or community support committee. No member of Hamas would sit on the committee. The EU plans to tell Israel next week that Palestinians uprooted from their Gaza homes should be ensured a dignified return and that Europe will contribute to rebuilding the sheltered territory, according to a document seen by Reuters. The Israeli military said a drone strike in southern Lebanon killed Mohammed Shaheen, the head of Hamas's operations department in Lebanon. The army accused Shaheen of, quote, recently planning terror attacks directed and funded by Iran from Lebanese territory against the citizens of the State of Israel. Hamas confirmed Shaheen's death, but described him as a military commander. Maureen, what do you make of Middle East developments?
Well, I think as a result of his meeting with President Trump, Netanyahu is definitely emboldened in what he will try and gain from Hamas and the Gaza Strip. I mean, I think, you know, to be fair, they're right to absolutely press for more and quicker return of the hostages. But I fear that once all the hostages are returned to Israel, that we could well see Netanyahu resuming the war in the Gaza Strip, particularly, in order to root out the last vestiges of the Hamas regime. You know, we talk in terms of Ukraine about Ukraine having to be in talks, but at the moment we're not seeing anyone representing the Palestinians in Gaza at any talks. And, you know, whether you like it or not, they should be represented at the talks. So it's going to be interesting to see which Arab countries will step up and see that the Gazans are protected and allowed to stay in their own country in the Gaza Strip, because Egypt and Lebanon have both made it very clear that they have absolutely no intention of taking any more refugees. I mean, the Lebanon already has a huge number, what is it, something like 200,000 or something, refugees since way back when. So that country simply cannot support any more refugees. And why, anyway, should there be, as many have called it, and I think it is too, ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip just to satisfy Trump's ideas of what he would like to see there?
Thank you. Continuing on with our Ukraine coverage, European leaders meet in Paris to discuss Ukraine. European leaders are grappling with a shift in the global approach to Ukraine's war, following the US's decision to enter bilateral peace talks with Russia, sidelining Europe's role in negotiations. Ursula von der Leyen has called for an emergency mindset to respond to this new development. The European Commission President urged a stronger, more urgent collective response from Europe, emphasizing the need for heightened defense efforts to address both Ukraine's situation and broader European security. Her remarks came ahead of an emergency summit in Paris, where leaders from several major European countries gathered to discuss their role in a potential ceasefire agreement and the broader security guarantees for Ukraine. The meeting was prompted by the recent decision of US President Donald Trump to engage in direct talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, leading to concern among European nations that they might be sidelined. British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer echoed the sentiment, stressing the situation affects not only Ukraine, but also the security of Europe and the UK. Starmer emphasized the need for European unity and readiness to play a full role in defending Ukraine's sovereignty should peace talks lead to a formal agreement. Sweden expressed openness to contributing post-war peacekeeping efforts in Ukraine, while Germany and Poland were more cautious. The German government indicated it was premature to discuss military involvement, and Poland reaffirmed its stance of providing financial and military aid rather than deploying troops. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk made it clear that this country would not send troops to Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron called for the Paris summit after Trump's announcement of talks with Russia, and the leaders of several European countries, along with NATO officials, were expected to attend. Meanwhile, the US has made it clear that Europe could not be directly involved in peace negotiations, though it is consulting the European capitals on security guarantees for Ukraine. The summit highlighted the growing divide between the European Union regarding its approach to the war, with some countries, such as Slovenia and Romania, expressing dissatisfaction over the exclusion of all EU states from the talks. Hungary, a notable ally of Trump, voiced strong support for the US-Russia negotiation, positioning itself as an advocate for peace, in contrast to what it described as a pro-war stance from other European nations. As European nations confront the shifting dynamics of a conflict, the Paris summit marked another step in an ongoing struggle to align their strategies for peace and security in the region. Maureen, how important do you think these talks are going to be? How strong of a stance will develop out of this? And do you see EU countries being increasingly in opposition with Trump regarding the Ukraine-Russia conclusions and how to solve it?
I mean, this is sort of international diplomacy at its height, really, isn't it? I think I think the EU has been put in a position that it's never been in before. I mean, it's never been thought of as a military alliance. Yet, if if the European Union is going to defend and support its Eastern European members, then clearly something has to be done. And I think Poland is a really important country in all of this. Poland is one of the countries that spends a lot more than 2.5% of its GDP on defence. And I think, you know, as I said, if we're going to support our allies on the Eastern Front with Russia, because Putin is not going to stop Ukraine, then I really think that the European Union has to step up and unfortunately find itself in the military space, if you like. I think I'm a bit sceptical about the idea floated at the weekend that Stammer could be some sort of go-between the US and the EU. I think the EU, including the UK, has to speak with one voice, and I hope that is what comes out of the Paris summit today. Although, as you've said, there are some outliers like Orban. But this, as John Major said at the weekend in a very important interview, this is completely scary. Well, he didn't say scary, but I think it's scary and new territory for us all to be in.
Thank you. Shifting over to the UK, where the Scottish Government say that national insurance rise is hitting jobs, growth, and prices. Employment and Investment Minister Tom Arthur is urging the UK government to reconsider its increase to employer national insurance contributions before it causes what he calls lasting damage to Scotland's economy. He said the rise was a brake on employment, endangered economic growth, and was likely to result in higher prices for consumers. The Scottish Government estimates that the extra burden, with employer national insurance contributions rising to 15%, will cost businesses £850 per employee on average and hit the budgets of charities and public sector bodies. Speaking ahead of a debate in Parliament this week, the minister said efforts to support businesses and boost investment are being undermined by the UK government's decision. Mr. Arthur said the following: "This decision is hitting Scottish businesses hard, reducing their ability to contribute to Scotland's economy, all while hurting employees' pay packets. Businesses now face the impossible choice of cutting jobs, reducing hours, cutting wages, absorbing the cost themselves, or passing some of the burden to consumers in the form of higher prices." The First Minister set out a clear plan for growth in the programme for government, using the levers at our disposal to support businesses and to attract investment in critical areas like the offshore wind supply chain. Yet, our efforts to support businesses, entrepreneurs, and investment are being undermined by this tax on jobs. If the UK government is serious about economic growth, they must reconsider this decision before they cause lasting damage to Scotland's economy. Maureen, we have a lot of stories similar to this, with a lot of complaints being levied specifically at at employer national insurance. Do you see this choice ever being reverted, or would something like this only ever be fixed for Scotland if Scotland had more economic powers of its own?
Well, clearly, your last point is absolutely true. We could be making our own decisions, and we need to be able to make our own decisions. It's becoming ever more urgent to have independence for Scotland because our economy requires different rules and different ways of working. For example, we need net migration into Scotland to keep the economy growing, and so our demands of an immigration policy are very different to those of the rest of the UK. So, I mean, I don't know what Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer's new Labour government thought was going to happen, but clearly, if you have something like £850 per employee to find, then it's definitely going to mean layoffs and or um, increase in prices, or in the end of the day, maybe some businesses will just say it's not worth and viable to continue, and therefore there will be job losses. And the thing is that we're not going to know the full extent of this until after April when it comes in, but obviously, well past the summer, by which time businesses will, themselves know what's happening and, be making up their minds to decide what to do further. I mean, the whole thing is absolutely rubbish economics, even although Rachel Reeves says she's an economist. And then on top of that, we have the added burden of what we're going to do with defence. So we are, the UK government is really in a very precarious position with its finances. I think there is going to have to be breakage of the fiscal rules. I don't actually agree with them anyway. Um, and because of more investment required in defence, although I have to say, Europe needs to decide exactly what it needs to spend in order to protect Europe's borders before, and then decide how that's going to be paid for and divided up among the countries. It's no, I hate this word that we have to get to 2.5. We've got to find what's required and then find out how much it's going to cost to pay for it. So I think, we are entering completely different territory from that which we've been in since the crash in 2008.
That's right. And more economic trouble in our next story, where UK companies are considering their biggest layoffs in a decade as business confidence slumps. Business confidence in the UK is collapsing as employers prepare for the rising national insurance burden from April, with surveys showing growing redundancy plans and concerns over the UK's economic instability. A new survey by the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development (CIPD) reveals that redundancy plans among UK employers have reached their highest level in a decade, with nearly a third of businesses intending to reduce their workforce. This is partly due to increased employer national insurance contributions and a rise in national living wage. The CIPD's findings come amid broader economic concerns, with official data showing that the UK narrowly avoided a recession in late 2024. Though figures are expected to show rising inflation and unemployment in the coming weeks, small businesses are also struggling, with the Federation of Small Businesses (FSB) reporting a dramatic fall in confidence. The confidence measures for small firms dropped from 24.4 points to 64.4 points. That's the confidence measure of small firms. Small business owners expressed greater concern over planned tax increases than weak consumer demand. The hospitality sector, in particular, responded with the lowest levels of confidence. Many firms are also apprehensive about the impact of new employment rights legislation set to take effect next year. The fall in employer sentiment is leading to cost-cutting measures, such as reducing headcounts, raising prices, and cutting back on investment in workforce training. Employers are bracing for the financial impact of these planned tax hikes, and concerns about unemployment are growing as firms begin to make redundancies. The UK Treasury has defended its plans, emphasising that the budget aims to provide stability and protect workers' wages while supporting business growth. However, with continued uncertainty, many businesses are fearing a difficult year ahead. Maureen, obviously, I understand that this is a similar subject matter to the final story, so let's hone in specifically on this statement from the UK Treasury, where they're defending their plans, emphasising that the budget aims to provide stability and protect workers' wages.
Well, when this stable era is going to come, I don't know. I mean, businesses plan very long term, much longer than from budget to budget. So they've been hit, as they say, with the national insurance hike, which wasn't planned. I think rises in wages and the rise in the national living wage, um, they could have reasonably expected in the manifesto of the Labour Party during the election. They made quite clear that there was going to be increase in employment rights, and employment rights do not necessarily by themselves mean increased costs to businesses, and it could, if they were businesses were good at implementing them, also lead to increased productivity and more job satisfaction. So these shouldn't necessarily all be seen as negatives. But of course, one thing that is a negative is that if businesses have to cut costs, then training and health and safety can be a cost that, in my view, is a kind of reverse, a negative cost, because if you cut back on that, then your businesses are not going to grow. So it's just really, for businesses, I do feel, a perfect storm, and it's going to be difficult, especially, as you said, Patryk, for smaller businesses who do not have access to organisations like the CIPD. They might not have a big HR department. They might not have their own HR managers. So in terms of what's all required, it's going to be very difficult for small firms to perhaps employ a consultant in in those areas where they might not have done before. So it is going to be very difficult.
Thank you, Maureen. Resolution Foundation say that the poorest UK households are paying out higher share of income on council tax. A new report from Resolution Foundations reveals that the UK's poorest households are paying a growing share of their income on council tax, resembling the poll tax that led to Margaret Thatcher's downfall. The report highlights that the poorest fifth of households paid 4.8% of their income on council tax in 2020 to 2021, a significant increase from 2.9% in 2002 to 3. Council tax is levied differently across the UK, with England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland applying varying systems. Despite its intentions, the tax is considered regressive, meaning it burdens poorer households more than wealthier ones. The Resolution Foundation criticized the government's failure to reform the system, pointing out that the poorest now contribute 3 times more of their income to council tax compared to the richest fifth. The increase in council tax payments follows the abolition of a council tax benefit in 2013 and the removal of rebates in some areas. These changes have progressively worsened the system, with the foundation comparing the current issues to those created by the infamous poll tax. The poll tax, which replaced domestic rates, was highly unpopular and led to riots, ultimately contributing to Thatcher's resignation in 1990. The council tax system was introduced in 1993 as a compromise, but now critics argue it is starting to mirror the flaws of a poll tax it replaced. As councils face increasing costs, particularly in social care, the Resolution Foundation predicts that the trend of rising council tax payments could worsen. Some councils in England are already proposing substantial increases in bills for the coming year, potentially placing further financial strains on low-income households. Maureen, do you think that our current council tax system needs change, and how difficult would it be to change it?
Yeah, I think it was just last week when I was on, we were talking about how the Scottish Government has set up a consultation on council tax and council tax reform. It wasn't wholesale reform. I think it was, tinkering about with the bands and seeing how councils could perhaps make it a bit fairer. And certainly in Scotland, um, the bans have been expanded, I think, to include higher other ones at the high level. But it's still just tinkering around the edges, and by its very nature, it is a regressive tax. And with in Scotland, the council tax freeze being lifted and councils now being able to set their council tax, it will be interesting to see. I think it's the band D one, which is considered the average, and what it will be across the country. But if there was an easy fix to the council tax, to reforming council tax, I think it would have been done by now, but there isn't. And various local government ministers in the Scottish Government have tried to get some agreement on a way forward, and it's just not been possible.
Thank you, Maureen. Over 900 party members, including MPs, criticized Labour's migration and asylum policy. Over 900 Labour members and trade unionists have accused the UK Labour government of adopting performative cruelty in its migration and asylum policies, mimicking the actions of a Conservative party. A joint statement from the Labour members, including MPs, peers, and trade unionists, criticised the UK government's recent approach to asylum seekers. They condemned the Home Office's decision to deny citizenship to individuals who arrive in the UK through dangerous routes, such as small boats crossing the Channel. The statement also pointed to the government's emphasis on deportations, highlighted in recent publicity materials that showcased images of individuals being removed from the UK on planes. The statement, coordinated by the Labour Campaign for Free Movement and the group Momentum, was signed by several MPs, including Nadia Whittamy and Diane Abbott, as well as former MPs now serving as independents. The group argued that the government's measures echoed the performative cruelty seen in the previous Conservative administration, which was rejected by voters in the last election. They also claimed the policies breached international obligations related to asylum and safe passage. Further criticism focused on the UK government's anti-migrant rhetoric, which they argued would not solve key issues like housing shortages, healthcare staffing, or wage increases. Instead, they suggested that this rhetoric was feeding into the rise of Reform UK by adopting their hardline views on immigration. In addition, 148 individuals, including prominent figures like Christina McKenney from Unison and Church of England bishops, Church of England bishops, signed a letter urging the government to reconsider its policy of stripping asylum seekers of their potential citizenship. The letter warned that such policies could fuel division and escalate attacks on migrant accommodations. Maureen, what do you make of this ruling? And does a ruling like this even help with anything? If you don't even have a plan of how to move people that you aren't letting apply for asylum or to be refugees, how do you think this issue should be tackled, and what do you make of Labour's movements on it so far?
Well, I think the letter is important because it is signed by not just Labour MPs, but so many different people, including trade unions, the church, and others. And I suspect that it was initiated because of the increase in racism that abounds in in the UK. And it is just, as you said, fueling the flames of reform. And it's not unique to the UK. We can see the right-wing parties increasing their vote throughout Europe. I mean, somebody needs to get a grip of this and really point out the figures of our aging population, the lack of numbers of people who are working to provide the taxes, to provide the services for the people who are not working, as well as schools and housing and health services and all the rest. We need to point out the number of people who are working in these services who have come from abroad. I mean, it is simply a product of, as I said, an aging population and our need, if we want to continue to grow as economies, and we do need to have growth in order to pay, as I said, for all these services, then we have got to point out that net migration to this country is a good thing. And it's how the focus is always on the ones who are coming over in boats. There's never a focus on how more quickly asylum applications are being processed, and things that could really calm the waters rather than put oil on the water.
Thank you, Maureen. Legal experts warn Trump and Musk's U.S. government purge is cutting more than costs. Donald Trump and Elon Musk's efforts to slash federal spending have raised alarms, with critics arguing that their moves undermine democratic structures, violate laws, and concentrate power in unaccountable hands. The Trump administration, along with Musk's Department for Government Efficiency, DOGE, has aggressively pursued cuts across several agencies, slashing staff and regulations in bid to reduce government spending. These actions have sparked widespread legal challenges from Democrats, state attorneys general, and legal experts who argued that the moves violate the U.S. Constitution by undermining the checks and balances assigned to protect democratic governance. Musk's team has been given sweeping powers to overhaul federal operations, including targeting agencies like the Treasury Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Critics claim that these efforts are not truly aimed at eliminating waste, but rather serve the interests of powerful donors, including Musk, who has poured significant funds into supporting Trump. The tension between Musk's cost-cutting drive and the legal checks in his actions escalated when Trump fired 17 Inspector General veteran watchdogs responsible for overseeing government spending without notifying Congress as required by law. This move has drawn legal opposition, with some of the fired officials suing for reinstatement. This push to reduce federal workforces, especially in agencies involved in social service, has led to multiple lawsuits. State attorneys general have challenged DOJ's attempt to access sensitive data, such as information about Social Security and tax refund receipts. A recent lawsuit led to a temporary order halting Musk's team from accessing Treasury documents, prompting Musk and Trump to accuse the judiciary of improper interference. Legal experts argue that the concentration of power in Musk's hands, coupled with the firing of critical oversight officials, poses a significant threat to the rule of law. Former prosecutors and judges have warned that these actions could erode public trust in the judiciary and executive institutions. Critics argued that Musk's involvement in federal operations without relinquishing his private sector roles bypasses essential accountability measures, undermining the constitutional balance of power. As these efforts continue, concerns grow that Musk's action could undermine the public interest, enriching the wealthy at the expense of transparency and accountability in government. With Musk's deep ties to Trump's campaign, some argue that the arrangement risks making the government a tool for private interests rather than American people. Legal watchdogs and experts are increasingly alarmed by the potential long-term consequences for the integrity of U.S. democracy and the rule of law. Maureen, passing over to you. Obviously, a lot of this story focuses on the sort of clear-cut negative elements of what's happening. However, there also are still people that will support Trump and even Musk in many of these terms. What do you say to sort of claims that maybe overstepping some of this quote bureaucracy or overstepping some of these rules is just what's necessary to get the job done and get things moving, which is the sort of argument that Trump would make in this place?
Yeah, let's be clear. This is absolute dictatorship in action. Musk and Trump are slashing and burning vast areas of the United States. You can call it bureaucracy if you like, but it's there to, help people dish out pensions and funds and various other things to lots of people. And there will come a time, and I think there's already come a time, where Trump supporters themselves are the ones that are finding themselves fired from positions in the government. It's not just all going to be Democrat voters. And I'm sure that there will come a tipping point where people will say that they've gone too far. And surely the vast majority of Americans, surely being Christians who vote for Trump, also believe in the rule of law, because if not, then it's a complete collapse of the democratic state. So I think there's a long way to run in this, and the law, of course, takes its time, and legal objections to what Trump and Musk are doing will take time. And what recourse is there going to be against them? But I am sure, as I said, that Trump supporters, when they find that their pensions aren't paid, or some allowances aren't paid, some disability benefits aren't paid, that they're going to find themselves on the receiving end of this slash and burn of the state. And surely to goodness at that point, they will realise that they've made a huge mistake.
And just on that note right there, you mentioned even earlier today this sort of wider global trend towards maybe some more populist actors, some of these stronger right-wing voices. If this tipping point does happen in America, do you expect a global sort of trickle effect of that, with other countries realizing, oh, maybe we were jumping into voting for these people a little bit too fast? Do you expect something like that?
Well, that relies on more democratic forces and democratic parties calling this out for what it is. It's Trump gone absolutely mad. And if they think that this is what they want in their own countries, then they they can vote reform or whatever, AFD or whatever. But this is what they're likely to see. And while there is always room for looking at departments to see if there's overspends or whatever, I mean, in this country, because of the recessions and the type of governments that we've had in recent years, there's no fat left in any departments at local authority level, for example, you know, to cut anything more if you want these things, um, services to continue. So I think, unfortunately, many people are going to have to learn the hard way and see how it will affect them in the long run, before we might get a change of heart from people. But yes, I suppose one thing you could say is the further Trump goes in all this, the less likely other countries uh, are likely to vote for parties to follow in their footsteps.
Thank you, Maureen. Sticking in a similar theme, we've got a story where Musk is seeking access to the US taxpayers' data. The IRS is reported to be reviewing a request to grant a member of Elon Musk's Department for Government Efficiency access to sensitive taxpayer data, including tax returns. The Internal Revenue Service (IRS) is considering a request to allow a member of Musk's Doge team access to a classified system containing sensitive personal financial records. The request is under review, with plans for Gavin Kleiger, a software engineer working on a project, to have broad access to IRS systems, including tax returns and financial records. Kleiger, one of the young programmers recruited by Musk, is tasked with assisting in an IT modernization program. Doge's push to overhaul federal agencies has already caused controversy, with previous efforts to access data from the Treasury Department facing legal opposition. Despite challenges, Musk's initiative claims to focus on eliminating waste, fraud, and inefficiencies across government systems. The Doge team has set a 120-day deadline for their efforts, which includes overhauling technology at the IRS, a task which some view as crucial for improving services, privacy, and collection efficiency. The request for Kleiger's access is claimed to be about a need for technological modernization, as the IRS relies on outdated systems, some dating back to the 1960s. This push for upgrades is part of a broader strategy to improve government operations. However, questions remain about how this will affect taxpayer data security. Maureen, like a broad general statement on improving efficiency or getting rid of money that's being wasted, this is something that could be good in a way, right? Modernizing systems, bringing them up to speed. It's just why does it have to be done for this sort of weird side unelected body that it doesn't an official advisory group? Why is it being done this way by Trump?
Well, I think the request to access taxpayers' data is purely to try and find fraud among Democrats and to rubbish the reputations of many Democrats. I can't think of any other reason why you would want to see the data from taxpayers. This all stems from the idea that private service is good, public service bad, and there can't be any efficiencies in public service. Well, having worked in both, I can tell you, especially the oil industry, where there's huge amount of waste, or certainly was, and it still continues to some extent. It's not as a clear cut thing. Of course, every government wants to update its systems, but we see here, if you want to embrace artificial intelligence, it costs money, it costs investment money, which if departments are being asked to make savings, then you're not going to be spending money on updating the systems. It's kind of catch-22 situation. But again, I say that the way they're going about it in the United States is really slash and burn to the extent that many systems will just collapse.
Thank you, Maureen. Shifting back to Scotland, where the Scottish Government Public Finance Minister is seeking cost saving reforms to public services. Public Finance Minister Ivan McKee has issued a call to action to deliver system wide change to 150 delegates attending a major public service reform summit in Glasgow today. The minister said the event provided a unique opportunity to explore how to maximize our collective investment in public services to deliver the services people need. For a range of programs, the Scottish Government has been securing significant cost avoidance and cash releasing savings, expected to reach up to £280 million over a 2 year period by the end of 2045. By the end of 2025, sorry. While the Scottish Government workforce grew in recent years to meet the challenge of protecting the nation from a global pandemic, the core workforce reduced 3% between 2023 and 2024. Mr. McKee said the following. For the first time, the Scottish Government is hosting a summit bringing together over 150 leaders of public bodies, local government, and third sector, and the wider economy to discuss how they can work together to transform how public services are delivered for the benefit of people and communities all over the country. There is already good practice out there in many organizations. We need to learn about that and turn that into systemic change so that everywhere and in every sector, public services are designed and delivered efficiently and sustainably. The summit will provide a unique opportunity to meet delegates, and I want to thank people ahead of the event for attending as we kickstart this vital system reform challenge. Maureen, quite a opposite spin from the previous story, I guess. Similar concept, different band. Talk to me about the benefits of approaching this for this sort of transparent legal process with all these parties involved, and what sort of stuff can come from this.
Well, I think this is something that, governments and public bodies, and to be fair, private companies do all the time. The thing about private companies, in my experience, is that they allow themselves to get too big, to get bloated, and then every few years they have massive redundancies. That's been a particular case in the northeast with the oil and gas industry, and then they employ consultants at huge cost to see where these redundancies should fall. I think in terms of the public sector, the gold standard is to implement the recommendations of the Christie Commission, which was quite some years ago, where public bodies, and particularly councils, should cooperate across borders to make efficiency savings. So, for example, not every council, regardless of their size, needs some particular specialism that one person could be working on in various councils, or a reform that one council decides it should do could be adopted by other councils. They don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. I think in some areas, perhaps, for example, in social work, there needs to be more generalist rather than specialist. You could find an old person social worker, a family social worker, a children's social worker, all working with the same family, for example. So I think there is always still room for efficiencies to be made and better ways of working. And then, on top of this, we should be embracing AI where it benefits the public as well. And there could be lots of savings made. And I don't mean savings at the expense of people. I think it just means that people will have to find different ways of working.
Thank you for that. And for our final story of the day, we've got water bills in Scotland £113 a year less than in England, £130 cheaper annually than they are in England. New figures show that people who live in Scotland are set to save an average of £113 on their water bills compared to their English counterparts in between the years of 2025 and 2026. The figures published by Scottish Water and Discover Water show that the average water and sewerage bill in England and Wales in 25 to 26 will be £603 a year compared to the £490 in Scotland, where water is in public ownership. The data also shows the cost of English water bills is rising at almost triple the rate of Scottish ones, with an increase of over 27% in the bills in England in 25 to 26 compared to a less than 10% rise in Scotland. SNP MSP Willie Coffey said the following: public ownership means Scots will save £113 this year compared to those in England, a stark difference and a huge help to households during the cost of living crisis. While England's water companies are run for profit, Scotland's are run for public benefit. Keeping Scotland's water in public ownership was a historically hard-fought and hard-won SNP campaign, and the SNP will always protect that for the benefit of those we represent. Maureen, quite a success for us living here in Scotland. What makes this difference? What constitutes this cost difference?
Well, I think this final story kind of sums up what I've been saying throughout the programme. This is a classic example of public good, private bad. We have seen, as you've said, Patryk, water companies in England virtually bankrupt because they've been paying out so much money to their investors and boardroom members rather than investing in the infrastructure of the water company. And, it's always difficult with water bills because they're going to have to go up because inflation's going up, and being able to renew the pipes and things is always going to cost more money, and especially at the time now. But then we don't have investors to pay huge dividends to. So Scottish Water is a really good success story.
Thank you, Maureen, and that wraps us up for the evening of Scotland at 7. Before I go, I will remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you very much. We raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, and is only £16,000 short of our £36,000 target. We borrowed £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive, but the pressure is still on, and we need to find regular donors to give us the financial security we need. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford a £5 per month subscription, please consider being a Broadcasting Scotland supporter and donate whatever you can afford. Thanks again to Maureen Watt for giving her insight on all the stories today. It was lovely having you.
Thank you, Patryk.
And with that, goodbye.